Last week, Texas State Representative James Talarico visited the show to talk about his candidacy to win the Democrats' nomination for U.S. Senate. Today, we're joined by the other Democrat vying for this nomination, U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett, here to discuss her campaign for this hotly contested U.S. Senate seat, to define her policies, priorities, and to discuss why this race is so important not only to the people of Texas, but the entirety of the United States. Representative Crockett, a thrill to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I guess the first place to start is, first of all, we are in an embarrassment of riches right now in Texas when it comes to Democratic nominees. There's a lot of great ones out there. And if you look at you and Talarico on policies and issues, you're pretty much aligned. So my first question to you is, what advice do you give to voters on how they should decide, Democratic voters, who to vote for in this primary?
Yeah, so right now we're at this inflection point in this country. We are living in unprecedented times. And right now, it's very easy to say what you would do if you were in the arena. It's another thing to actually be in the arena. We have a record number of both U.S. House members as well as U.S. senators, Democrats and Republicans, that are retiring because this environment is just not one that they can really kind of function in. And so right now, it's a wild card. If you go with James Talarico, knowing who he will be on the federal level. I think everyone got a good taste of who I am as I've been on the federal level for the past 3 years. And this week was probably one of the toughest weeks for me. And we actually have some more difficult times ahead of us. We are supposed to engage in the depositions of both former President Bill Clinton as well as Secretary Clinton, as we're going through early voting, as well as a deposition of Lex Wexner this upcoming week as well. So having someone that can do the behind the scenes, obviously I'm a trained lawyer, but also someone who's already been functioning in this fight, I think it really is important because right now people want to know that they've got the right fighter in the arena.
Yeah, I heard a couple of words there: tough, fighter, really going at it kind of talk about the job that you're currently doing. Analysts compare your styles, both you and Talarico, and you agree on a lot of topics, but the way that you come across, they say that Crockett is a base energizer and Talarico is an independent voter-focused energizer. So if they are accurate in their assessments of your campaigns, what do you need to do to make sure that you have the energized base and that independent voter on your side?
I'm so glad that you brought that up because as you sit there in Houston right now, University of Houston, the poll that they just released on Monday actually said that independents and Republicans actually go for me over Mr. Talarico. I think that there has been a perception, but there's been a lack of data that supports the fact that Mr. Talarico is going to get Republicans or independents. And so the most recent data, that polling was done at the end of January, it suggests that I actually bring them over. Now, I will give you my analysis as to why I think that is. I think that right now, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, you feel as if the people that are in power are absolutely ignoring you. It seems like only the 1%ers are those that surround themselves around Donald Trump. They are the only ones that are the focus. We are not talking about how we are going to make this country more affordable. We are not pushing forward in an aggressive manner to get it done. Democrats, we have bills for bills for bills for bills. But what are you going to do to actually get that done? And I think that that is one of the things that people are maybe missing about this race for me. Me going to the Senate is more so about finishing the job, right? I absolutely believe that we're going to take the House. I appreciate the comments of Amanda, who was saying that, yes, they may have overplayed their hand, essentially, right? And thinking that they were going to get 5 seats. I think no matter how much gerrymandering they play around with, when we look at the swings that are taking place all throughout the country and right here in Texas, we are swinging so far that drawing those seats so closely, I don't think that they're going to get what they're looking for. But the question is, like, how do we get to this point? How do we get to the point that we have this particular Supreme Court? How do we get to the point that we would end up with this mid-decade redistricting? how do we get to the point that we don't have reproductive access? Everything leads down to this idea of, or that Donald Trump could even run for president again. It all falls on the US Senate. And so we have to change the math in the US Senate. So I think that it's not an either or. I think it is an and. Texas has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the entire country. Everybody wants to get out and register people to vote, but the reality is that we are only turning out a lot of times a little bit more than 50% of those that are registered to vote. And I do know, as someone who was a national co-chair for the Harris Walz campaign, that a lot of time the base was feeling like there was just a presumption that they would show up, and they weren't really being courted nor excited enough. And I think that I can bring that fire to the base while also showing that I have the competence and the know-how to do the things that independents and Republicans are looking for. And so, I think it's interesting that I am being attacked from all sides right now. The governor decided to spend money on an ad, not to deal with his own race, but to deal with me. But we also know that the attorney general did an AI generated ad of myself and Cornyn dancing together. And that is because John Cornyn and I have worked together on things that we could find agreement on. I mean, that's what it means to govern. And I think that as we go through this campaign, more people will understand that, yes, I don't go viral for my bipartisanship, but my bipartisanship and governance is there.
Yeah. To run for office, we all know it's incredibly expensive. There's so much money in there. I'm curious what we learn about candidates, or what we should take from candidates, by where they get their funding from. And if we analyze who is supporting you, what does that tell us about you? And is there a commitment back to those who fund you to do their work?
Yeah, so we normally put out a link and people can absolutely submit and donate. And then there's money that you can go after, right? And so I've not done an analysis of all the donors that have contributed to my campaign, that is for sure. But I can tell you that it is a lot of everyday hardworking people, even some people that aren't currently employed. We have so many small dollar donors that are making way in our campaign. I do think that when you do an overall analysis, I think what people should be looking at is something that we also tried to preclude, which was under Citizens United. And, we know that Elon Musk was able to contribute $250 million to this president's campaign. And we also know that Elon Musk gets $8 million a day from the federal government. Those are the kind of quid pro quo things that I think that we need to pay attention to, is who is potentially getting a kickback and what does that kickback look like? And we have so many direct links between this president and who it is that's actually making money. As it relates to like the senatorial campaigns, I've not looked at the donors that are pouring into Senator Cornyn, but we know that over $50 million has already been spent. I just know that there are people that are absolutely pulling for him. Can't say that I've done an analysis of, whether or not these are people that are looking out for their own financial interests or not. And then when you look on our side of the ledger, I've also not done an analysis on Mr. Talarico's donors. I know that there's been a lot that has been put out into the atmosphere. And I know about some of the historical data as it relates to some of the alarming points in his past donations, like with the Adelson money. But overall, I think that it's about look at how a person votes. And if you can draw a line, then you should absolutely draw that line and you should absolutely be alarmed.
It's been said that you guys agree on almost all of the issues: economic relief, immigration reform, health care. Where you differ, we want to know. That's where you differ, especially with economic relief, because we've been talking about where is the money going, who's voting for who, mainly about campaigns. But at this point in the election or the process, voters want to hear exactly, what are you doing for me? So in your own words, economic relief, that's important to all of us. What can you say? I'm exactly going to do this, this, and this, and no blah, blah, blah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The issues that matter to the voters. Hallelujah. All right. So actually just on, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but we actually took a vote as it relates to at least a portion of the tariffs. This was, again, the Democrats leading from a minority stance. It was the ranking member of Foreign Affairs, Greg Meeks, who carried this bill. We had a few Republicans that are pretty vulnerable that crossed over, and we were able to vote on some economic relief as it relates to the tariffs, specifically, most importantly, in Canada. So I personally think that number one, we've got to deal with the tariffs. Number two, and let me explain, let me go a little bit deeper on the tariffs, specifically in Texas. If you're talking about housing affordability, we get the vast majority of our lumber to build homes. We get that out of Canada. And so as people are saying, hey, I can't afford my home or I can't afford my rent, one of the issues that we have is that that's all increasing because of the tariffs. We also know, as it relates to our farmers and our ranchers, that their exports are down. So now we are experiencing record bankruptcies as relates to them, as well as record suicides as it relates to our farmers and ranchers. And so when we see things like the federal government or the president decided to send $40 billion over to Argentina, while at the same time, these terrible tariff policies reducing the amount of exports from our ranchers, the ripple effects are real. We know that right there in Amarillo, the Tyson plant that normally processes beef is going to lay off about 1,700 workers. And that beef from that particular plant went to supply 400 Wendy's. Having somebody that understands the entire ecosystem about how all this works allows us to start to kind of tinker around and start to make those fixes. Because some people say, well, I'm not a rancher, so how does this affect me? But understanding that entire flow. Same thing as it relates to groceries. This is one of the things that Vice President Harris talked about a lot, and people can Google. There was a point where people kept saying the inflation is so bad, it's so bad, it's so bad, right? But then there was also evidence of price gouging. So I'm actually working on some bills right now, and there's an article that you can Google where a Kroger CEO talked about the fact that they had actually price gouged in a moment in which people were understanding that a lot of inflation was taking place. So we've got to go after those that are cheating the system. We've got to make sure that all of the tax cuts that were brought about in the reconciliation bill, that we go ahead and X those out, because in that reconciliation bill, also known as the big ugly bill, we know that $1 trillion of wealth basically was transferred from those that are not at the top to those at the top. And so we know that those tax cuts meant that they were taking away money for Medicaid, they were taking away money for Medicare, they were taking away SNAP benefits. So I think that it's important that we, number one, deal with the tariffs. Number two, make sure that we are fortifying our farming. The farm bill is about 3 years behind right now. And our farmers are struggling, specifically right here in Texas. And then I think that it is important that we make sure that we get those cheats, whether it's the price gougers or whether it's the corporations and the billionaires that are not paying their fair share. When everybody in this country does better, our economy does better. And right now we see that our economy is shrinking. We've lost over 1 million jobs just since Donald Trump has sworn in. And the only way that we're going to get relief is if we act as quickly as possible.
I am going to take you back to philosophy a little bit here. And as we sit here and chat right now, there is a looming government shutdown, at least a partial shutdown of DHS. I'm curious for your philosophy on when is it, and we understand when you're in the minority, there are limited tools you can use. And one is these government shutdowns. When is it appropriate and when isn't it appropriate to shut down the government because of all the ripple effects it causes?
Yeah, it just depends on how bad it is, right? The shutdown will be squarely on the shoulders of the Republicans. We know that we endured most recently, that particular shutdown was the longest in the history of our shutdown. In fact, we know that there is one thing that Donald Trump is really good at setting a record for, and it is shutting down the government. That particular fight, I think, was a fight that was worth waging. We know that the tax subsidies as it relates to the Affordable Care Act, that they were set to expire. They did expire. And now people are not going to be able to afford health care. Again, going back to this affordability issue. And so, I think that we pushed as hard as we could. And I think that the only time that you could push in the minority is when you do have a very salient issue. We know that the elections that occurred right before there were Senate Democrats that basically gave in on that particular issue. We know that we saw some historic wins because the people were with us. They were scared. They were nervous about their health care. And right now we're getting the stories of people that are saying, you know what, we're just not going to have health care because we just can't afford it. Depending on where you are, we've seen premiums, go up into the thousands of percentage points. It is absolutely unsustainable for so many families that are already struggling. So I think that that was worth waging. I think as it relates to DHS, because you're talking about a partial shutdown, I think that this is a fight worth waging as well. We know that there are American citizens and there are legal residents and others that are scared every single day. And again, because of that reconciliation bill where they were pulling out dollars from Medicaid, Medicare, and SNAP benefits, they decided to give a historic amount of money to ICE in that particular bill, $75 billion over 4 years. And now they're looking for more money. And so, this idea that we're going to continue to reward bad behavior that not only violates the laws that we've written, but violates the Constitution, and there's no oversight, there's no accountability, that has to stop. There's been a lot of coverage, or there was a lot of coverage of the fact that myself and Joaquin Castro went down to the Dilley facility. Secretary Noem decided to circumvent the law that was written by Congress and tell us that we're not allowed to go into facilities unless we give them a 7-day heads up. That is not the law. We wrote it the way that we wrote it for a reason, because we need to be able to go in at a moment's notice and actually see what's going on, not let you prepare, not let you put everybody on lockdown, not let you go and throw things under the bed. And so we've got to get some very basics under control before we say that there's more funding. And right now, they're not interested in even just following the law as it's laid out. So I don't know why you would continue to fund that under these circumstances. And this is the only leverage that we have, as specifically being in the minority.
To stay with equal timing, we're going to have to drop this conversation here, but okay. I appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Representative Jasmine Crockett, thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, get out and vote. We start on Tuesday.
Reminding everyone, early voting for this primary begins Tuesday, February 17th, with Election Day on Tuesday, March 3rd.